Hey readers, my name is Jess, and in today's video I'm going to be talking about all of the books that I read in September, so let's get into it. The first book I read this month was For the Wolf by Hannah Whitten, and I've been meaning to pick this book up for so long, but I think the mixed reviews had me pushing it off. It's about a girl named Red who was born the second daughter and therefore has always belonged to the wolf. While her sister Neve will one day inherit the throne, Red will be sacrificed to the Wilderwood in a ritual that is rumored to bring the lost gods back. Neve is begging Red to run because she doesn't want to lose her sister, but Red has this power inside of her that really scares her, and so in an effort to protect those she loves, she heads off to the woods where she can't hurt anybody. When she arrives in the Wilderwood, she finds that the wolf is actually just a man with power similar to her own, and the Wilderwood is dying and he is giving too much of himself to save it. Can Red help him with her magic? Does she even want to? Honestly, I could tell why this book has pretty mixed reviews. I feel like I have pretty mixed thoughts about it as well. It is a Beauty and the Beast retelling with a dash of Little Red Riding Hood, and that part of the story was done very well, and I loved the moody forest setting. But the world building was not the most straightforward. There were a few questions regarding the magic system that went unanswered for too long, causing me to become a bit detached from that part of the story. I really enjoyed Red's character though. Her connection to the Wilderwood and the wolf was really interesting, and there's a lot of tension between Red and the wolf, and I think that that's the part that kept me intrigued. For a lot of the book, I was annoyed by these chapters called Valaden Interludes, where we're taken out of the Wilderwood and we go back to the kingdom to get Neve's perspective. Whitten made it so that these chapters were critical to the story. I just kind of wish that they weren't. There are only 7 of these chapters. I just always found myself disappointed to get to them because it meant leaving the magical, mysterious forest setting and the characters that I actually liked. To be honest, I found Neve kind of insufferable. So overall, there are parts of this book that I really liked and parts of it that I didn't. But I'm really glad I finally got around to reading it, and I did enjoy it, but I don't know that I would go out of my way to recommend it. The next book I picked up, spoiler alert, is a 5-star read. Lessons in Chemistry by Bonnie Garmis. This is a historical fiction novel about a female scientist in the 1960s. Elizabeth Zott is a passionate chemist whose path in the field has been anything but easy. When she's not being taken advantage of, she's not being taken seriously either. That is, until she meets the one man who sees her for the intelligent, special woman that she is, famous scientist Calvin Evans. Calvin and Elizabeth fall madly in love, but after a freak accident, she loses him forever. But Calvin did leave Elizabeth one thing behind, something that they never planned on: a baby. So now Elizabeth is facing parenthood all on her own, which is an even harder job than being a woman in science, but she doesn't have to worry about the latter anymore because she got fired for being pregnant. But a new opportunity presents itself, her very own evening television show where she will not only share recipes with housewives, but teach them that they are so much more than society gives them credit for. It's a hit, but it's also detested by many. Many see it as inappropriate, with Elizabeth encouraging women to reject the labels and expectations that have been forced upon them for decades. I am absolutely dumbfounded that this is Bonnie Garmis's debut novel. It was exceptional. The characters are so well written, even the dog. It's paced perfectly, and every page is packed with so much emotion, sometimes sorrow and disbelief, sometimes hope, and sometimes love. I felt very empowered by this novel and its message, and I feel grateful for the progress we've made as a society since the 60s. Elizabeth Zott may be a fictional character, but her words remain true. Courage is the root of change, and change is what we are chemically designed to do. To any women who find themselves in a male-dominated field, or if you've ever been told by a man that you cannot do something, I am right there with you, and I'm declaring this book required reading. I will warn that there is one brief scene about 20 pages in that includes sexual assault, and I just wanted to throw that out there so any readers that may be triggered by that are aware. It's a significant part of Elizabeth's story though, so it is mentioned throughout the book, but only the one time in detail. I also want to mention that Elizabeth is very vocal about her atheism, and she does not hold back, even though her views were seen as scandal-worthy at the time. But that's just Elizabeth's character, no nonsense and unapologetically honest. And even though I don't necessarily agree and found the anti-religion talk a bit extreme at times, isn't that the point of literature, exposing yourself to others' beliefs and worldviews? I feel like rather than projecting your own beliefs onto a specific character, it's more interesting to take a step back and try and understand why a character might see things a certain way. So then I read The Lion Women of Tehran by Marjan Kamali. This story starts in New York City in the 1980s, where our main character Ellie has recently moved with her husband. One day she gets a letter in the mail from her home in Iran, and it ends up being a letter from her estranged best friend Homa, who asks her to please call her and says that it's urgent. We are then transported back to Tehran in the 1950s, where Ellie meets Homa after an unfortunate change in circumstances. Even though they come from very different backgrounds and social statuses, they become the best of friends at their primary school. Ellie recounts their relationship for the next several years, including drifting apart, rekindling their friendship, going to university together, and then ultimately a betrayal that changes everything. As I mentioned, this book takes place in Iran, and there are a lot of political injustices that Kamali touches upon, but what is perhaps more interesting than the issues themselves is the difference in the perception of these issues between Ellie and Homa because of their lifestyle differences. Ellie's struggles are very different than Homa's, and Ellie has been fortunate enough to know a comfort that Homa never had. Therefore, Ellie can afford to have a more laid-back attitude towards politics, whereas Homa is an activist fighting for change in her country. Homa makes a lot of sacrifices throughout the book to try and secure a better future for Iran. Kamali's writing is absolutely beautiful and thought-provoking. It's so effortlessly immersive, and I thought the characters, specifically Ellie and Homa, were so well written and complex. I'm a little bit embarrassed to admit that I was unaware of the extent of some of the issues discussed in this book, specifically the rights, or I guess lack of rights, for women in Iran. In the author's note, Kamali clarifies that she's no historian, but I think she did an incredible job of exposing readers to what's going on over there and for how long. Plus, it did inspire me to do some research of my own upon finishing the novel, just because I wanted to learn more. So not only did she write this stunning story about love and friendship and courage and betrayal, but she also informed and spread awareness, and I think that that is so cool. If you're someone who loves historical fiction, emotional books, or stories about strong and complicated female friendships, I cannot recommend this book enough. The next book I picked up was The Reading List by Sarah Nisha Adams, and this is an emotional, heartwarming, contemporary fiction read about the value of books. We have two main characters, Mukesh and Alicia. Mukesh is an old man who, following his wife's death, is having a bit of trouble venturing out of his routine and comfort zone. He misses his wife very much and feels a little bit disconnected from his daughters and grandchildren, but one day he finds his wife's old copy of The Time Traveler's Wife and decides to give reading a shot, and he ends up really enjoying it and feeling connected to his late wife. 17-year-old Alicia, on the other hand, has a pretty complicated home life. Alicia and her older brother have to take on the role of caretakers for their mother, who is currently struggling with mental illness. And when Alicia's not at home looking after her mom, she is working at the library, even though she doesn't really read. So Mukesh decides that he is ready to continue his reading journey after his positive experience with The Time Traveler's Wife. So he goes to the library and meets Alicia, and he asks her if she can recommend another story for him to enjoy. Unfortunately, stressed Alicia is uninterested in helping the old man and ends up being pretty rude to him. So after he leaves and she starts to feel guilty about the way that she treated him, she decides that she'll make it up to Mukesh by giving him a recommendation. Luckily, she has just found a list of 8 books, starting with To Kill a Mockingbird, and after reading it and enjoying it, she decides to put it on hold for Mukesh. And This kind of starts their blossoming friendship where these two seemingly very different individuals begin to open up as they discuss these books and work their way through the list. It's really sweet because the books are not only bringing these two characters closer together, but they're also inspiring them to make these changes in their personal lives, or even just like offer a bit of relatability and perspective. This book is divided into different sections based on the novel that they're reading at the time, and it's really interesting to see the way the characters are interpreting the books and what they're taking away from them based on what's going on in their own lives. I think that you'll appreciate that part even more if you're familiar with the titles mentioned, like To Kill a Mockingbird, Life of Pi, Kite Runner, Little Women, and more. But even if you haven't read those stories, I think you can still appreciate their discussions and thoughts. I loved this. It reminded me a lot of the Lonely Hearts Book Club, which I enjoyed back in January, but yeah, it's just a great story about love and loss and friendship and books and community, and I really enjoyed it. Then I picked up A Study in Drowning by Ava Reid. I really enjoyed this fantasy. It had an eerie, almost gothic vibe and had elements of mystery as well. The story follows Effie, a college student passionate about literature, especially the work of the recently deceased author Emrys Myrddin. Unfortunately for her, girls are not allowed in the College of Literature, so instead she attends the School of Architecture where she is the only girl. She's not super interested in architecture though, and she finds herself being mistreated by her classmates, so she's reaching the point where she's like not sure how much more she could take. But then the opportunity arises for one lucky architecture student to redesign the late Myrddin's estate, and she jumps at the chance to go, of course. When she arrives, she finds that she's got one heck of a project on her hands. The manor is in ruin and is falling victim to the rising sea. Not only that, but she's seeing visions of the Fairy King, the fantastical creature from her favorite story, that begins to haunt her. But Effie isn't the only college student staying at the manor. A boy from the literature department, Preston, is also there, secretly hoping to prove his theory that Myrddin didn't actually write his most famous novel. You know, the one that means so much to Effie. However, Preston's been at the manor for weeks and hasn't yet found what he needs. So he asks Effie to help join his quest for truth. And even though Effie doesn't want to admit that there's a possibility that Myrddin could be a fraud, Preston offers an incentive that she cannot resist. But diving into the late author's personal life and secrets is proving to be more difficult of a task than they thought. This is marketed as rivals to lovers, and while I really enjoyed the romantic subplot, I'm not sure I would consider our main characters rivals. They definitely dislike each other, and Effie is even a bit prejudiced towards our male main character because of where he's from, which is not cool. But yeah, I don't think I would call them rivals because they're not in competition with one another. I guess they're more like nuisances to lovers. Ava Reid's writing is so beautiful and atmospheric, and I think that was my favorite part of the book, that really eerie and mysterious feel. And I spent a good portion of the book wondering if Effie was a reliable narrator, which just added so much to the story. This book definitely has themes of misogyny and mental illness, but it also has themes of hope and love and truth. So if that sounds like something you would like, then I think this would make a great fall or winter read. With that said, if someone asked me for a gothic fantasy recommendation, I think I would be more likely to recommend One Dark Window before this one, but I still really enjoyed it. The next book I picked up was James by Percival Everett, and this is a reimagining of The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn, but in this one, Jim is telling the story. I read Huckleberry Finn in high school, and I can't say that I went into this with the clearest idea of the original. I didn't remember much of it, but as I've started working my way through the story, the memories from Mark Twain's classic novel came rushing back to me. We follow an enslaved Jim who is on the run after finding out that he has been sold and will be separated from his wife and daughter. And he's hoping he could figure out a way to not only free himself, but his family too. At the same time, Huck fakes his own death and runs away as well. And this puts Jim in a really tough position because not only is Jim a runaway slave, which is already bad, but on top of that, he's probably going to be the one that is blamed for Huck's disappearance too. We then follow the adventure of this young white boy and a runaway slave as they make their way up the Mississippi River hoping for freedom. Using I dialect, Everett is able to suggest that Jim is playing a part when he's in the presence of whites. He makes himself sound less intelligent by speaking in this sort of slave language, but when he is alone or around other slaves, we are treated to his real voice, and he is so smart and observant and wise, and it's just really nice to see James as a character without any facade. Similar to my experience with Octavia Butler's Kindred, I was left speechless and horrified by the way slaves were treated in the antebellum South. And I appreciate that Everett is not shying away from the truth, but it really can be such a tough thing to read about. The disrespect and cruelty and violence that was inflicted upon people just because of a difference in skin color will never not turn my stomach. I also think that if you love Twain's original novel, you'll enjoy this one too. I think that Everett renewed and breathed new life into Huck and Jim's adventure. And I know that it could be really scary when stories that mean so much to you are being retold or reimagined, but I really think that Percival Everett did this one to perfection. The last book I picked up this month was The Drowned Woods by Emily Lloyd Jones. After reading and really enjoying The Bone Houses a few months back, I knew I wanted to pick up The Drowned Woods this fall. It takes place in the same world inspired by Welsh folklore. It is a standalone, so you don't need to read The Bone Houses to enjoy this one, but there are nods to that story that you'll probably appreciate if you have read it. This is basically a fantasy heist book following our main character Mare, who is the last known water diviner and is hiding from the prince. The prince basically kidnapped her when she was a small child and used and abused her magic for years. And once she found out that he was using her power to hurt people, she ran and has been hiding ever since. Now she's given the opportunity to potentially get revenge on the prince. One of Mare's old friends from her time in the castle has devised a plan to venture to the enchanted well that protects the kingdom and houses its riches. And their plan would result in enough riches to provide them freedom and likely take down the prince as well. But many have attempted this same mission and failed, so they need to employ the perfect team. That includes brains, a master thief, and a fae-cursed young man who will be the strength or the killer when needed, and an adorable corgi. I really enjoy these books because I feel like I know what I can expect from Jones, and that includes a thrilling YA fantasy, really immersive writing, sweet romantic storylines that come second to the main plot, and apparently the most precious animal sidekicks ever. The second half of this story was awesome. After our group started the heist and headed out for the main island, I had a really hard time putting this book down. I know when I read The Bone Houses, I noted that I anticipated many of the twists. I don't think I could say the same thing about this one. The twists in this book were great, both delivering in shock value but also feeling believable at the same time. I was sitting there like, oh, how did I not see that coming? If you're looking for cozy but dark YA fantasies to enjoy this fall and winter, I'd highly recommend checking out Emily Lloyd Jones. She actually even has a new release out on October 1st called The Wild Huntress, so I look forward to reading that one as well. So those are all of the books that I read in September. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video, and maybe I'll see you next time.